Hey guys, it's Mike here, and I just watched Mandalorian Season 2, Episode 4, Chapter 12, Siege. Now, I was looking forward to this episode after last week's big episode, where we were reintroduced to prominent Clone Wars characters in live-action form. And you could check out my review of that episode in the top right corner if you haven't seen it yet. But this week, I was honestly not expecting very much to happen, because this season so far has been following a kind of formula where one episode something big and plot relevant happens, in the next it's some kind of side quest with little to no connection to that. However, upon seeing this episode, it ended up being far more significant than I think any of us realized, and dropped some big details and revelations about Baby Yoda and the Empire that could be directly setting up the Star Wars sequel trilogy. So what exactly happened this week? Well, let's get into that now. But first, make sure to subscribe and enable all notifications so that you can stay up to date with all my future videos. So in this episode, Mando and Baby Yoda were continuing on that quest to find the Jedi, who we now know to be Ahsoka Tano. However, the repairs of Mando's ship were too shoddy for them to make it all the way to her planet. And we actually get a funny scene where Mando is telling Baby Yoda how to fix the ship, which reminded me a lot of the scenes with Baby Groot and Rocket Raccoon from Guardians of the Galaxy 2. However, this doesn't work out, and as a result, they decide to stop on a familiar planet, Navarro, from Season 1. There, Din Djarin encounters some old friends, with Greef Karga, played by Carl Weathers, and Cara Dune, played by Gina Carano. But this is when Weathers asks Mando to join him on a mission to help clear out a base of Imperial remnants who were still on the planet. At first, he doesn't want to, but is swayed by the offer of free repairs. And of course, Cara Dune is on board because she hates anything to do with the Imperials. So the group goes together with a returning character, the bounty that Mando collected in Episode 1 of Season 1, Mithril, the Blue Alien, who is apparently having some lasting issues from the carbonite freeze. Once there, they break into the base that's located on lava flats and work their way through it to the controls, where they unleash the lava flow and initiate the self-destruct sequence for the base. However, just before leaving, they encounter Imperial scientists who are in the process of destroying evidence of their experiments. And this is when we get our big twist of the episode, when it's revealed that this base is actually a cloning facility, and the Empire is working on cloning Force-sensitive bodies for an unknown reason. And then Mando finds a holodisc of the cloning scientist from Season 1 talking about Baby Yoda, and what he says here is that their prior clones hadn't been successful, but if they can get back the child, it has a chance of succeeding, because he has the greatest concentration of midichlorians on record, which they're trying to extract from him through his blood, something I'll speculate a little more on later in the video. However, this leads to a non-stop action sequence as the group has to shoot their way out of the compound, and then has a chase with stormtroopers on speeders, while they're in an armored vehicle, and eventually TIE fighters who get involved. And it was a pretty intense sequence that was well directed by Carl Weathers, who acted and directed in this episode. At one point it seemed like they were done for, but Mando flew in on the Razor Crest and took them out from behind, much like Han Solo at the end of Star Wars A New Hope. After getting back to the main city, we find out a little more about Cara Dune's backstory, as she encounters a New Republic pilot who is searching for the Razor Crest in Din Djarin, where the pilot talks to her about joining the New Republic, and how Cara was from Alderaan, the planet iconically destroyed by the Death Star in A New Hope, and how she lost everything as a result. Now, I'm not sure if this was mentioned in Season 1, although I believe it was in extra materials, but it gives us a much better understanding of why she hates the Empire and is always willing to fight them, at least on her own terms. But as Mando and Baby Yoda left the planet in search for Ahsoka, we discovered that Moff Gideon, who is on his own massive Imperial ship, is tracking the Razor Crest, aware that the child is on it. He tells his underling that she'll be rewarded in the New Era, which is once again strongly implying the beginnings of the First Order and the events in the Star Wars sequel trilogy. And the last image that we see is rows and rows of experiments that look like Dark Troopers, who will no doubt play a role in the events to come. So let me first start by getting into the things I really liked about this episode. Of course, Carl Weathers returned here and directed this episode, and I've always really liked him as an actor, be in the Rocky movies or my favorite movie of his, which is Predator.
You son of a bitch.
And he's been great in this show so far, serving as a character who always feels like he's on the verge of turning on Mando, which is something that I kinda was feeling for the first half of this episode when I was getting Empire Strikes Back vibes, and I thought that maybe he was gonna turn Mando into the Empire. However, just like in the first season, he ends up being revealed as having a better character and helps out Mando in some big ways. But for his first episode directing, I think he did a good job. Gina Carano also returned, and she was good in the first season as well as here, although she was more in the background in this episode. Of course, Moff Gideon, Giancarlo Esposito also returned to set some big things up to come, not only in this episode, but likely in the sequel trilogy. And although his appearances this season so far have been pretty brief, every episode that he's in is always better for it. And I would also say that this episode had a really strong second half, which was filled to the brim with action. So if that's what you're tuning in for, you'll definitely get what you're after. Although I will say that the first half was a little slow and not quite as strong. But once it gets to the big twist, it's like a roller coaster ride from then on. And there are also a lot of fun Easter eggs this episode, like the blast him line that the stormtroopers yelled when spotting Mando's crew, as well as a fight scene that takes place in the Mandalorian Foundry from season 1, and even more that I'm sure eagle-eyed fans were able to catch. As far as things I don't like, the first thing that I really would have to talk about is the school scenes, because they were pretty cliche, and Baby Yoda, despite being a great effect, is out of place when surrounded by real human children, especially in that very Earth-like setting. And also, maybe you can call this nitpicking, but does Star Wars really have these schools just like we do on Earth, with kids sitting in rows at desks and listening to a single teacher talk? That method is long outdated in our world, let alone in a futuristic society with computers and robots. The closest that we came to this was Jedi younglings training with Yoda in Attack of the Clones, and even that felt out of place. Also, even though it was brief, I didn't like the scene with the stormtroopers crashing into each other when they were just going down a hill on speeders. They seemed to improve the Imperial incompetence factor a bit by having their blasters actually hit their targets a few times, and had some cool moments here and there during this sequence, but this one really made me roll my eyes. It was a little too dumb, even for stormtroopers in Star Wars. Now, as for the big twist of the episode, what exactly did we learn here? Well, the Empire is trying to create Force-sensitive clones for an unknown reason. Their plan hinges on recovering Baby Yoda, because he possesses blood with the highest count of midi-chlorians, which they're trying to infuse into these clones. And based upon what was said by the cloner on the holotape, the child may actually be a clone himself, perhaps being a literal Baby Yoda in a clone of the Jedi Grand Master. That would explain why the Empire just so happened to have a Force-sensitive member of Yoda's species in their possession, and why they're so desperately trying to get it back. Now, as for how they could have acquired his blood, it could be from the midi-chlorian tests themselves, because as we know from episode 1, Yoda was previously tested and had the highest midi-chlorian count aside from Anakin Skywalker. So it's entirely possible that Palpatine attained his blood sample after taking over the galaxy and clearing the Jedi out of the temple. Either that or they just got really lucky and found another Force-sensitive user from his race.
Now, what would be the odds of that?
Now, as for why they want this, I think it's tying directly into the sequel trilogy. The scene of the twisted bodies in the test tubes is very reminiscent of the pickled Snoke bodies that we saw from episode 9. And in that movie, we found out that Snoke was essentially an avatar for Darth Sidious, a Force-sensitive clone that he manipulated in order to control the galaxy and give rise to the First Order. Of course, Palpatine has already been a clone by this point in the story, so it raises the question of how they created a working body for him before Snoke or these other ones. But we may find out more about that later on. As for Baby Yoda himself, it's possible that Palpatine intends to use him as his ultimate new body, like he was grooming Rey and Kylo for in the sequels. A youthful body that will live for centuries and allow him to rule indefinitely. But considering that he wasn't a 2-foot-tall puppet in The Rise of Skywalker, I'm guessing it doesn't work out for Sheev in the end. With that being said, it's somewhat disappointing that the show is apparently setting up the sequel trilogy just because of how poorly it turned out. Maybe they're doing here what they did with the Clone Wars for the Star Wars prequels, and are using Mandalorian to fix some of the issues of the Disney sequels and fill in the blanks. Considering who is running the show, I would say it makes sense. But I will be disappointed if all these characters who are being introduced here are all just killed off to fit into the narrative of the new movies, and set up Rey as being the only true hero who can save everything. Either way, the rumor about this not connecting to the sequels is obviously false. Like half the other ones floating around the internet these days. Although considering how this all ends, I might not mind our characters revisiting the world between worlds from Rebels and giving the timeline a slight adjustment. So what did you guys think of Mandalorian Season 2, Episode 4? Let me know down below in the comments. Make sure to subscribe and enable all notifications so you can stay up to date with all of my videos. Thanks for watching, and make sure to stick around because there's a lot more to come in the future.